Jeff.
Okay. My name is Jeff Ripplinger. I'm with AV Science, and I'm joined by my fellow colleagues, Mike Garrett and Craig Peer. And nice enough to join us this evening is Phil Jones with Sound United and Jeff Clark of Audyssey.
Hey guys, how are you guys doing?
Good. We're really glad to have you, both of you, all of you.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
So as Phil and I kind of went over, I'm going to let Phil kind of drive the bus here. And he and I went over a couple of things to start off with, maybe on the receivers. And then after we go through that, delve into the Odyssey. Once we get the receivers, how do we set up the receiver properly?
Okay. Well, you know what? Why don't you ask me the questions so we can turn which way you want to go? I know you guys had some questions about, future plans and some other things. So where would you like to start? And then we can go from there.
Give me a second. Let me pull that back up.
Yeah, you had a great list, Jeff. Okay.
Yeah.
I'd like the answers to half of those questions.
Well, some of those answers I can't give you.
Right.
I like my job.
We can always
Right.
ask them, though.
And
So,
while he pulls that up.
Yeah, I've got it up now.
Okay, what's up?
So one of the first questions that I had, maybe we need to go over is, I think maybe a lot of people don't look at what kind of speakers they're trying to drive when they get a new AV receiver.
Yes.
And how much power they may need, depending on the speaker itself. So if you can kind of touch on that, and my point being that, people may want to look at a little more power in their AV receiver based on the speakers they're trying to drive.
Oh, that is a very, very good point. Like speakers vary in sensitivity, but they also vary in, there's no such thing, like when you buy a speaker, they say it's a 4-ohm speaker or an 8-ohm speaker. There is no 4-ohm speaker or there is no 8-ohm speaker. It's nominal. And as frequencies shift up and down, the impedance of your speakers shift up and down. The 4-ohm means normally, most of the time, or it is 4-ohm or it is 8-ohm. But that speaker can swing between 2 ohms to 16 ohms, depending on whether it wants to play that particular note or it doesn't. So there's two things that are going on. Sensitivity, if you have a really sensitive speaker, the amount of wattage normally required to drive that speaker goes down, which means when you're playing music, most people, and you're playing maybe guitars and things like that, the amount of dynamics and the amount of the volume that you're playing it at is going to be a lot lower. So the wattage demand in order to drive that speaker is going to be lower. But as we get into movies and you're going from birds to gunshots to cannons to explosions, that is where you need more power. Now, a lot of times I'm saying you're not buying a Audifier, you're buying an amplifier. And when you walk over to a big receiver, what makes it heavy is its ability to deliver current. And current, so a lot of times when we do these movies, and we do it in our theaters all the time, we have we have 3 Class A Delta stereos running our fronts. And those big amplifiers never really go above 35 or 40 watts, even at their biggest, some of the biggest crescendos. Why? Because it's the current delivery, the ability to grab that speaker, grab it, pull it back, and pull it forward to control it. So a lot of times as you get a bigger amplifier, you also get higher current capacity. So if you're looking at a receiver, sometimes you may see a receiver that's 100 watts per channel, and it costs $500. Or then you see another one that's 120 watts per channel, and it costs, I don't know, $5,000. A lot of times it's not about that. It isn't the extra 20 watts. It's how that wattage is made, how much current is being utilized. That's why the $500 one weighs 15 pounds, and the 120 watt one could weigh 150 pounds because of the amplification, the power supplies, the additional transistors, and all the stuff you need to support that to deliver the current. So there's 2 parts, the wattage part of it and the current part of it. If you really want it to be dynamic and you really want your bass to be strong, a lot of times the bigger wattage comes with more current. And that is what's really going to make your speakers and your system more punchy. Does that, what do you think? Does that work?
Yeah, I can still hear you. If you can hear me, I'm sending out those emails. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, I just wanted to touch a little bit on when somebody's looking at, like you say, an 80 or 100 watt receiver, should they, based on their speakers, which you just explained,
Mhm.
should they be looking at 125, 140?
Yeah.
Something more like that.
Well, the interesting thing about it is most of the time you damage speakers by having too little power because the amplifiers clip. You can never have too much power. I always say buy once, cry once. So even if you have a very efficient speaker, you still want to have that power because the receiver works less hard. And it also gives you the ability in the future, if you decide that you want to move on, you can. The nice thing about our Denon and Marantz receivers is they do have pre-outs. So if in the future, if you decide that you want to grow, like for example, in my house, I started off with I had a SR 8015, which is an absolute beast of a receiver, but I also have a pair of Wilson Watt puppies. So what I decided to do was use a PM10, a Marantz PM10, and use the pre-outs to drive the PM10, and then use the receiver's internal power to drive the center channel and all of the surround speakers. The one thing about this that I want to point out too, and actually it's going to be something that Jeff and I always point out. A lot of times people look at Odyssey, or they look at the receivers will do their auto calibration, and they go, why are all of my speaker levels set to minus? Well, remember what the receiver's trying to do is when you turn our receiver, if you set it to its dB settings and it goes from like minus 60 dB to plus 20 dB, 0 dB is supposed to be reference theater level. So if your speakers are really efficient, it is going to attenuate those, and you'll see minuses on all of your levels. So when you turn the receiver to 0, it is playing at reference level. If your speakers are not efficient, it may not. It may have to attenuate to get it to, when you turn it to 0, its reference level. So people see that all the time, and they go, why, when I have these big clip speakers or really efficient pair of speakers, is the receiver, when you run it in Odyssey or any other of these other room compensation circuits, attenuating the actual speakers? And that's because the goal is 0 is theater reference level. Is that a good way of explaining it, Jeff?
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's 100%.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I agree that you always want to cut, you never want to boost, because when you
Exactly.
start boosting, you start introducing distortion.
Exactly. So you always want to cut, and the receivers will cut. So that's something we hear all the time. The other thing about power that you had mentioned, and I saw in your questions, was you were asking, why did it get so warm? So you got to remember that when you build an amplifier, all these amplifiers are AB amplifiers. Most of the time, when you look at most receivers now, they're still using AB, class AB amplification. You are starting to see digital amplification, because digital amplification has made major improvements in sound quality. Like if you look at our PM10s, our KI Ruby from Marantz, if you look at our Model 30 Marantz integrated, which has really, really good reviews, those use digital amplifiers. So digital amplifiers used to be kind of a compromise and maybe only used for subwoofers, but the quality of digital amplification is improving. But you still see mostly class AB. If the receiver is biased more towards A, which is a nicer sounding, because remember, it does A until it can't, then it switches to AB. The longer your receiver is biased at A, the warmer the unit's going to get. And if you have 7 channels or 11 channels or 13 channels of amplifiers, even when it's turned down, and your phono circuit is biased towards A, your preamp circuit is biased towards A, and your amplifier circuits are biased a little bit more towards A, it's going to get a little warmer. So you do have to, and we try to work on things like fans and stuff like that. People go, well, why do when I touch this? Because even if I have a Marantz Pre-Pro, an AV8805A, and that thing gets warm. Why? Because the preamps are biased towards A.
Yeah.
I also want to interject here really quickly that if any of the attendees have questions, please put them in the chat, right, Mike?
Yes.
Put them in the chat and we will relay them onto the appropriate party and get your questions answered. I forgot to mention that at the beginning of the show here.
Okay.
One of the other things, Phil, that maybe you can touch on a little bit, and Craig brought this to my attention and we talked about it briefly, is the DACs that Denon and Marantz are using.
Okay, so let's talk about this. You know, we are a big company, but like any company, you're always vulnerable to supply. We all know that, right? I mean, that's the reason why you can't get lumber to build a house or drywall to do a wall these days, because there's supply issues. It really gets difficult when factories burn down. So one thing about us is, because we had such a good relationship with companies like AKM, we had a pretty large inventory and we knew it was coming. So we got as much as we possibly can. But let's talk about it. We don't have enough for everything. So I was talking to the engineers for Marantz, and the way that he explained it to me, one of the head engineers, is think of a receiver as a meal, all right? And a master chef has looked at and has put together all of these different ingredients, the preamp circuitry, the D-to-A converters, everything to make this particular meal. And that meal, part of that meal would be, say it's a certain cut of steak from your favorite ranch, and it's Wagyu, and it's from this ranch, and it's this cut. And all of a sudden the guy goes out of business, right? The chef will be able to substitute a different piece in there. But of course, a real good chef would realize that there's a difference between his favorite piece of Wagyu and what he has available now. And they will go out of their way to change the other parts of the ingredients to make that meal still a very, very good meal. So when we had to make changes, or if we have to make changes, which we did, it wasn't just pop out the old chip and pop in the new one. Every other part that went with it had to be adjusted. So for example, if we know that the D-to-A converter is a little brighter, you can make adjustments to things like the HDAM to make it warm again. If we know that it's too warm, we can adjust the HDAM circuitry or the other circuitries in a Denon and Marantz to get the balance we're looking for. And that's what happened. They went through, they took the product back, they re-engineered all the boards that went with that particular component, and they submitted it back to the Japanese sound masters, at the Denon sound master and the Marantz sound master, and they worked on it until they got it back to where they believe it was the mill they wanted you to have. So I just swapped out for a while, we had an AV8805 in that was 2 or 3 years old in our theater, and I swapped it out for a new AV8805 A, because we have an 8K projector in there, and I will tell you that it sounds just as musical as it was. So think of it as, yes, the ingredients has changed, but we went out of our way to make sure that the new ingredient is blended properly with everything else in the system.
Got it.
Okay.
And probably the one you can't talk about is, you know, we have a lot of people ask us, hey, when are we going to see new stuff? When are we going to see new stuff? And, you know, so I don't know.
Yeah, I like to keep my job.
Right.
But you will see that they, you know, the best way I can explain it is, you want to make sure that your products continue to advance with newer technologies. And every time an engineer makes something, they're always thinking about how they can make it better. So I will tell you that these guys are looking to develop new pieces. And I always say, I can't tell you what, I can't tell you when, but I will tell you that when it does happen, and it will be sooner than later, you will be very happy.
Very good.
Oh,
Well, we are coming to see you, so if there's anything new, we'll see it.
Yes, you will. And I will. Well, by the way, I will be at CEDIA, and we will be doing courses which are open to anybody who attends to go over the latest technologies from Denon and Marantz. We're also doing one on CI and home theater speakers, you know, that cover all of our brands, as well as high resolution distribution of high resolution wireless music. So they'll be kind of fun And we're going to be showing some really cool, there'll be some cool demo spaces as well. We have multiple demo spaces, so it's going to be kind of a fun. Everybody's looking forward to CEDIA this year.
Yeah, especially
good.
since we haven't been to one in, a couple years now.
Yeah. Well, yeah, for us, that's our big show. Because if you look at CS now, CS is more, I always say it's for mega companies to kind of peacock and show corporate power. I mean, the last time before COVID, Google built a roller coaster in the parking lot. Has nothing to do with audio or anything dealing with consumer electronics, but wow, it's really, really cool. And it seems like if you really are concerned with seeing the better offerings from companies that still make audio video, it seems like CEDIA and things like ISE are the shows to go to. And I think and everybody's been waiting for the world to open up a little bit. So I think this show is going to be absolutely outstanding.
Yeah, the
Great.
sense will always be more of an audio show this year. More audio.
I could totally see it. I mean, will there be changes to video? Yes, but most of the projector companies, which I know, have already shown their wares.
Yeah.
Most of the TV companies normally show their stuff or announce their stuff at CES. So I think this time it's going to be a lot of great audio introductions, is what I think.
Right. I did have one question, Phil, from a customer of mine, and he wants to get a receiver, specifically a Denon, but he wants to just use it for gaming. So he's got like 5 gaming boxes, an Apple TV, and a Blu-ray player or something.
Okay.
And his PS2 is a legacy product that doesn't have HDMI out. All the other products that he wants to plug into this thing do. So he was asking me, well, if I use now, like on a 1700, I don't even think it has a component video input, or maybe you just use the composite video and the left-right audio. Where the 2700 has a component video input.
Yes.
What his question was, does that then upscale to the HDMI output so he can plug all of his sources into the receiver and the receiver HDMI into the 4K TV?
Yes, and that's one of the things as you move up the lineup, there's a couple things you get. Of course, you get more channels amplification, you get more surround sound modes, you get a bigger processor, which has better Odyssey, but it also allows to do things such as a more elaborate video system. So you can do things such as A to D conversion and upscaling. So for example, if you get in something like maybe a 3700, like that level, it will definitely upscale to HD, 4K, or even 8K, depending on how you have your system set up. So if you're someone that wants to combine both legacy components as well as the latest components, that is the way to go. If he is using, say, 8K gaming devices, so say he's using something like a Xbox Series X, a PlayStation PS5, and maybe a gaming PC with a NVIDIA graphics card, that's where we have what's called an AVS 3. It's a little 3-in, 1-out switcher that you can get.
Got it.
And people go, why did we do that? Why did we not just have, because you can see brand whatever, B, whatever, has multiple 8K inputs, and you only have one. Well, when the boards were built, you had the choice of 1 in and 2 out, because we realized, or 2 in and 1 out. But if I did 1 out, I can't have a TV and a projector. We realized that people that do this want a TV and a projector a lot of times. So we did 1 in and 2 out. The boards that were available that had 3 in or 4 in and 1 or 2 out only support 24 gigabits per second, which means whenever you're doing 8K 60 and 4K 120, it is applying DSC compression. So you'll see if you look at when they give you the rating, so it says 8K 60 or 4K 120, there's a little A and B next to it. A indicates uncompressed, B indicates compressed. And you will see a lot of times it'll say, 3 ins and 4 outs, 4K 120 with a little itty bitty B. We support compressed and uncompressed at 40. So we looked at it and said, we want to give people the ability to have uncompressed 4K 120 and 8K 60, which meant we had to use a single, the board only had a single input. This device now allows you to convert that. So now you can have 3 8K at 40 in plus 6 or 7 additional inputs. So you can have up to 10 things connected, legacy devices, as well as HDMI with this. So it was a great way to expand the compatibility. Most customers only have one 8K source, but we realize that there are some maniacs out there, like a lot of your friends, that are looking to connect a whole lot more devices, and that will allow you to actually grow your system in the future.
Okay, now how is that controlled then? Is that remotely controlled? How do you switch inputs on the switcher?
Oh, it's cool. So there's a couple ways you can do it. If you want to maximize your inputs, it comes with a remote control, and that remote controls those inputs 1, 2, 3 are discrete codes. So if you have a control system like me, I have a URC in my house, I can say watch PlayStation, and the receiver goes to its 8K input, and it tells the switcher to switch to input number 3. And that's done seamlessly. So you can use the remote, you could program it into a control system. But say you want to use the Denon or the Marantz remote control, there's a switch on the side. And what it will do is when you click that switch, it'll say reassign these particular names of inputs, media piece, media player, gaming PC, and aux1. And when I hit that, I want that to not be the aux1 on the back of the receiver. I want it to be input number 1 on this box. So that allows you to use the factory remote control. Now you're not going to have as many inputs, because now when I hit media player, it's going to use the input on the little external box, not that input. So the question is, if you want to use a ton of inputs, 2 remotes or a control system, if you want to use 1 remote control, you can hit that switch.
Got it.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's good info.
Yeah, and by the way, there's 2 of them. There's one for Denon and one for Marantz, because the control systems are different.
The codes are different, yeah. So this may be a good time to segue, because I want to try and keep this to an hour.
Okay. If
we can, so that people aren't dropping off, nodding off, and we can go longer if we get a lot of questions. But this may be a good way to segue into the Odyssey part of it, because personally myself, having just purchased a new Denon receiver, that's where I'm at. And I have the multi EQ app on my iPad, and I've played around with it a little, enough to be dangerous, and I've got a relatively flat curve, but it's going to be helpful to me, as well as people that are, maybe just purchased a Denon or a Marantz, and they're trying to figure this stuff out. Because like a lot of people like REQ, and I've read maybe a quarter in the help section of the REQ software, and it's like, oh my God, I'm not a programmer like Jeff is. It's like I would mess this thing up every way to Sunday. So it may be a good way to segue into that, because I know that's a lot more involved in getting your system perfectly balanced and tweaked, if you will.
Yeah, so that's the nice thing about having Jeff here. So Jeff and I have worked I've done a lot of these, and there's a few things we want to talk about that are just, first, let's start off with the basic tips, Jeff. How many positions should be measured?
Measure 8, or as many as you're allowed to on your AVR.
Why should you measure at least 8? Why should you measure 8?
Well, first of all, you have 2 ears, so don't measure 1. Second of all, the more information we collect and the more kind of area we cover, the better understanding the room acoustic issues, and it helps sort of smooth out the response and give us something better to correct. If you try to correct for a single position or just a pair of positions that are really similar, it kind of can overcorrect to the point where you don't actually sit in just one position, one fixed location when you're listening. You lean forward, you lean back, you may just slouch over a bit. Those are all different microphone positions. So even if you want a sweet spot, even if you want one perfect, as good as you can get sweet spot, still measure all those positions where your ears would be. So lean back, lean forward. Number one thing I see people doing is they'll measure like they're sitting back, and then when they go to listen, they're leaning forward up like this. And it's like, but you didn't measure that. So why would you expect that to sound correct? So we measure, even if you're just doing a sweet spot, all 8 positions.
Yeah. Another thing that's interesting, if you have a newer Denon or Marantz receiver, you will see that it has what's called dual speaker preset, which allows you to do 8 measurements for the money seat, the sweet seat. So when Mike is sitting in his seat, it's for him. Then you can do another one that uses more positions on the couch that'll make a wider sweet spot, which I call family mode. So when everybody else comes in and you want to play it for a larger group, you can go into the receiver and quickly switch that.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of the app is you can save both configurations. Say I have a Denon, I have a Marantz AV8805, or you have a Denon X 8500H or HA. Those units, their circuitry does not have a dual speaker preset function. But what you could do is you can do one calibration for everybody in the room, save it as a configuration in the app, then do another configuration, my seat, save it in the app. And then what you can do is you can quickly boot from that app into the receiver. When okay, people are coming over, let me boot in the party surround. And if it's just going to be let me reboot back in just me mode. So that's one of the advantages of the application. You can also do that with the software program. Now, what's a benefit, Jeff, of the app versus for $20 versus using the processing that's built into the receiver?
Sure. They're both good options. The app gives you more control, more opportunity to interact with the measurements. So most of all, you can edit your target curve, and that's something that your more power users want to be able to customize. Maybe the bass response, the high frequency response. It allows you to decide to only EQ in the low frequencies. So if you're want to be below the Schroeder frequency and you have an idea of what that is in your room, you can do that. It's not generally our recommendation, unless you feel that that's something that really particularly suits your system. But you also have control over the high frequency roll-off options that we provide, as well as a completely custom editor for that.
Okay.
It helps you manage bass management and trims, delays, so you can save all of those in your setup and so forth. So those are all kind of things you don't quite get with the built-in calibration. They both use very similar calculation processes, but the one on the phone is a little fresher in some cases, but generally the same idea of what's going on.
Okay. Now
I love
other
the
thing
phone
too,
app.
yeah,
I
the
love
phone
the
app is
phone
great.
app.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk about the software program. It's more expensive, but the power is dramatically better, more. And we'll talk about that in a second. The other thing I want to point out is people always look at it and one of the things you'll see is a mid-range compensation, a little dip at about 2K. And people go, why the heck is that there? So Jeff, let's talk about that, because that's kind of an important point.
Yeah, why is that there? That is there because there's a change in directivity in most speakers. So most speakers use a sort of a cone mid-woofer and a dome tweeter. And those two drivers work very differently, and they have a different dispersion. So the small driver sends sound everywhere in the room. The bigger driver is more beamy. It sends it straight forward when it's at its high frequency limit. So there's a change in how the sound is perceived, even though the measured response might look like it's smooth. There's a difference in how it's perceived. And what mid-range compensation does is it takes away that sort of like you've got your hands around your mouth, that little that mid-range sort of emphasis that isn't necessary. And what you'll see in a lot of speaker systems is that the designers of the speakers, they're smart guys, and they put a dip in their speakers from the get-go, from the start. They design their speaker that way, and who are we to take it out? So
Yeah.
they know what they're doing. And if the number one thing I see is, well, I don't need this mid-range compensation, but then I'll take a look at someone's measurements, and each of those speakers in every position has this mid-range dip in it. And when I see that, it's like, and they wonder why the system's not performing optimally. It's because they've taken it out, and it really is suitable.
Yeah,
Now,
now that's an important point. Let's stay there for a second. One of the benefits of having the app is the app will show you the pre-measurements of every speaker that you have connected. If you see a dip, leave it in there.
Yeah.
because the person who designed the speaker thought it was best to put it there. If you look at your speaker and you don't see a dip, don't use it.
Yeah, you don't have to use it.
Yeah, the other benefits of the app is, say the dip is in a different location. You can turn off the pre-selected, like for example, a pair of Bowers, our big cinema CT8s that are in our Bowers CT8s, its dip is not at 1K, at 2K, it's at like 2,500. So we flattened it out and we built our own custom curve that matched the response of the speaker. So flat may not be the best way for you bought them because they sound a certain way, and you're taking out the thing that some of the characteristics that you liked about the speaker before. So one of the benefits of the app is you could actually do that. So that is a cool thing. So that I always want to stress that people see that dip and they go, why is it there? Now I'm going to actually show my screen here real quick. So the next thing is, the app is how much, Jeff?
$20, $30.
20 bucks,
I
30
forget.
bucks. Yeah. So it's pretty
It's not
inexpensive.
to be fair, that's that's actually a Sound United Denon and Marantz app. So this is this
should be asking him.
So let's talk about that. Yeah,
Odyssey provides the technology on the mobile app. So we're talking about the multi-cue editor that's available in the Play Store and the Apple Store. So Odyssey provides the technology. Denon and Marantz put the front end on it and put the user experience on it. So what we're looking at here on Phil's screen is our new multi-cue X software. Now this is software made by Odyssey, and what we saw was an opportunity to go more directly to the end user with all of the advanced features that we thought we wanted and that we've always wanted to see in the AVR and in the Odyssey control system. So this gives you everything in the kitchen sink to edit, to change, to tweak, and to look at in excruciating detail.
Exactly. Now the big thing about this, we always want to remind people that, Sound United and Odyssey are partners. We don't, like I said, we don't own Odyssey. So Jeff's team had to figure out, they had to build this, and they have to pay somebody to build this. So they do have to charge for this to make it worthwhile. This app goes with the receiver. So basically you buy a license for your receiver, right? And then this can be utilized to customize that receiver. And that is bought through the Windows, the Windows Store, right? And what is
Microsoft Store, yep.
What does this piece retail for?
This is $200.
Okay. So it's $200, but if you really want to dive into precisely controlling your receiver, this thing is wondrous. This is what we use to just tune our new theater costs. It's about $350,000 worth of stuff. It's a combination of 10 Class A amplifiers, Bowers Cinema Series. The list goes on and on. It's shocking how many things are in that room. But this allowed us to really go in and fine tune. So you can go in and set your subwoofer levels. And then of course, just like on the app, you can go in and you could see all of your measurements by channel. And not only by channel, you have your aggregate view, which is what you saw on the app, but you also have the ability to see, if you measure it 8 times, what each of those room spaces, what each one of those room positions are that made that aggregate. Does that make sense? So you have a lot more understanding, and you can really kind of dive in here. So I can really go in, I can see what it looks like, I can smooth it so I can get a better understanding. I can look at it in finite detail. this is probably closer to what you're actually saying. People panic when they see that, you know, but I can go in and I can look and I can see, oh, there is a little, this has a mid-range dip. Don't take it out because it was put in there by the manufacturer of the speaker for a particular region. So not only can you see that, you can also go in and you can make your own target curves. So can you talk a little bit about these little target curves?
Yeah, you could say yes and override that. So the target curve is your target sound. So again, flat is not usually what we want. Usually a typical home room and home theater needs a high frequency roll off to compensate for differences in acoustics versus a commercial theater. So we default with our theater high frequency roll off 1, but you can decide to change that, override it, choose one of the different options. And you can go through this on a channel by channel basis and design the target curve that you want for each of your channels. So you can see here, like Phil's got mid-range compensation is off and removed. But if you want to, you can go ahead and add these biquad parametric EQs that a lot of people are familiar with, assign them to which channels, and edit the frequency Q gain in a way that a lot of people are sort of familiar with from other audio arenas.
Yes, and you also have the ability to do other types of components. You can do all these different high frequency roll-offs. You can make all of these different adjustments. You can set your own mid-range compensation. Each channel can have their own different mid-range compensation. Each channel can have their own different target curves. The list goes on and on and on. So if you really want to dive into your system, this is a great tool.
Now, it's an important distinction is that these are all frequency response edits. So even though it's called a biquad or parametric EQ, it's still an Odyssey FIR at the end of the day. So we translate the frequency response that you want from this target curve editor into the correct FIR, finite impulse response. So our filters don't ring forever. They don't have feedback. And you get just the frequency response you want without any other artifacts.
Exactly. So and it's like what we did in our room was you also have the ability to see how these filters are applied. So what we did was we actually ran our system, and if you look at this little thing, so talk about the difference between the green line, the orange line, and the line down here, which is what, purple. So
yeah, sure. So this is the what you see is what you get. This is you have your before response. That's the aggregate measured response, same as the measurement page,
which is here.
We're showing that's the green one, yeah. And then we're showing you the filter that we've computed that adapts that green line into the yellow line, the after line. You have you'll see a whole bunch of extra controls over the low frequency EQ limit, the high frequency EQ limit. These are things that you never used to have control over because auto is usually a really good setting. So you don't necessarily want to go put 20 dB of boost in your speaker at 20 hertz. That's probably not a good idea. This software, you won't get 20 dB of boost, but you can override some of these things and get what we would call boost. In reality, there's not actually boost here. The filter is offset for like sort of just presentation purposes. It's always going to cut and make headroom for the filter that you've designed. But so that's why you'll see a boost limit when in these things. So you'll usually see around 9 dB of maximum boost. None of these filters are actually using that. They're really cutting a bit.
Yeah.
So
now here's an interesting thing about it. Now in this little example, this is a virtual example. This is not our theater. You'll see that there's a big boost in frequency at 50, which would make it a little boomy. So of course the system is going to kind of cut that out to flatten it. On our system, because our mains are basically a pair of, each channel in the front is a CT8 being biamped by a Class A Delta stereo with a CT8 subwoofer being driven by a Sigma mono. Each channel plays down, I think they're up 10 dB at 18 hertz. So now you don't want too much 50, but no one's going to look at a theater room and say, there's too much 20 hertz in this room. I don't want, so what we did was we looked at it and said, wow, this is attenuating these really, really low frequencies that everybody wants. And no one's going to complain about. So we went back in and built a new target curve to put that back. So what ended up happening is we said, don't attenuate the stuff below 30 hertz. Leave it alone. All right. And everybody loves that. Everybody, because no one looks at the rumble when a giant runs through and say, oh my God, there's too much 18 hertz in this room. So, and this gives you that power to go in and look at it channel by channel by channel and make those adjustments. So if you really want to dive in and really want to tweak your system and you really have an opinion on what it should sound like, and you want this type of curve or that type of dip or this type of, there's all these different types of adjustments, this gives you that capability. It's $200, but if you guys all have these high-end theater systems, it's worth every penny to have this level of control.
Hey, Phil, do you want to talk about the microphone required?
We can't talk about the microphone. Oh, if we go
Great
back
question.
and I go back to connect, there's a couple things going on. If eventually there's a place normally up here where you would say on a real one, you could actually determine what, if you're going to use the default microphone, or Odyssey now makes a calibrated microphone for this. So
You'll
first
see that on the measure page or the
Yeah.
sub-level page. Either of those pages should have it.
Okay, there we go. Let it go. There it goes. So you'll see that you have the ability to use the included microphone or add a mic. So let's talk about the included microphone. People go, well, I can go out and buy on Amazon a super high-end, more accurate microphone. But each of the microphones that come with a Denon and Marantz receiver, Jeff and those guys know the limitation of that mic, right, Jeff?
Yeah, it's been checked through. Every single one has been checked to match the specific curve that's built into the AVR to make sure that it's close enough to give a very good calibration.
Exactly. So if that microphone is less sensitive at 35 hertz, Odyssey knew that, and Sound United knew that, and we put in a factor to take that into account. So that microphone works spectacularly well, but they're making a lot of them, right? So there's a window that they have to fall within, right? Now Odyssey has a calibrated microphone that if I go here, you'll see that it's add new mic. So let's talk about what do I get if I get the new calibrated microphone, Jeff?
Yeah, the biggest differentiation is that we can get the level more precise. So usually the variation that we see in the microphones is level. And that's kind of the hardest variable to control in manufacturing. So it might be off a dB or two in level, and usually less so in frequency response. But the ACM1X microphone, the calibrated microphone that's designed for this software, is calibrated to our Type 1 B&K reference microphone that's continuously certified. So we know and give you an individual calibration file for that specific microphone. So there gives you the ability to remove all variables and all unknowns in the measurement process.
Exactly. So when you load the mic, when you say I have this new mic, it asks you what the serial number is. Your computer talks to their computer, and it gives you the specific curve compensation for your microphone. So it's pretty slick. Now, Jeff, why does the microphone have to be plugged into the receiver instead of plugged into the laptop?
Yeah, plugging into the receiver gives us the most accurate and the most precise measurement. So our specific measurement tone and technique of measuring gives us a noise cancellation. So it allows us to cancel a lot of background noise. So it means even if the environment isn't perfectly quiet, if there's AC systems, we still want you to quiet those down if it's an option, but there's some cases where that's just not possible. So our precision of timing between the microphone being and the playback of the test signal allows us to do that. And the only way you can get that precise of timing is to plug the mic straight into the AVR. the challenge then is that you can only extend the microphone maybe with one extension cable. That's sort of been our recommendation if you need to go a little further. Otherwise, this Multi-QX software also supports our old Pro kits. So there are a few people out there who still have these, or you can find them on eBay or Amazon sometimes. We're not selling them yet, but we hope to be able to reintroduce those at some point based on demand. For the Pro kit gives you a Pro measurement mic, a preamp, and you can extend it with about as much cable as you could want. It still plugs into the AVR, but you can then extend that cable for up to 1 kilometer. So if you really have, you know, some distance you've got to cover,
so hopefully your house isn't big enough.
That's the way to do it.
Now the other thing too is people go, well, what if I get an extender? The nice thing about something like this, about this application, is say you go out and you buy an extender. What we've had dealers do is they plug the mic directly into the receiver. They run a sweep of measurements, right? And then they take a screenshot of it. Then what they do is they plug in the extension cord, and they run the same sweep again.
Without moving the microphone.
Without moving the microphone.
Without moving anything.
And if there's no difference, the extension is not impeding the measurement.
Right.
So that's one way that you can verify that if I add this extension, I am doing no harm.
Right.
So it's a really, really cool thing. Now, there's a couple other things you want to talk about. People always see these other settings in the on their app or on the receiver or even in this program. So let's talk real quickly about these real quick and when would you use them. The difference between reference and flat.
Sorry, let's see, where are we? Oh, so reference, there's 2 different presets that go into the AVR. There's what we call the reference, which is sort of a high frequency roll off normally. And then flat, which is usually flat.
Yes, flat.
And with this software, you have the ability to control those separately. So you can create a target curve for each different one of those, and it can be whatever you want. So you no longer have to use it as reference, meaning a high frequency roll off, and flat being flat. You can make them target curve A and target curve B. So this is where you get to select, which of those tweaks applies to which of those target curve types. So normally we recommend starting out with a high frequency roll off and using reference in most cases, and it's typically good for movies and music. And that just allows you, then once you've transferred it to the AVR, you can use your AVR remote to switch between them as well. So it allows you to also quickly A/B target curve changes if you want to do that. So that's the multi-Q setting. Then we also have dynamic EQ and dynamic volume. Dynamic
Let's
EQ.
talk a little bit about dynamic, because dynamic volume is just the peaks and dips and level, right?
It's intelligent. We like to think of it as automatic intelligent volume control. So a lot of people say, well, I don't want compression. Well, this isn't exactly compression. It's more like controlling the volume for you. So if you're watching a movie and you find that like, oh, it's a kind of a quiet dialogue scene, and you start turning up the volume, and then explosions come and people are shooting, and like you find that you're pulling the volume back a bit, this does it for you. And so even if you if you're not listening at reference, if you turn the volume down 10, 15 dB, which is really normal, really typical, there's going to be really quiet sounds that are kind of dropping off the bottom. So dynamic volume can bring up those quietest sounds so that they're still audible. They're still part of your soundtrack that you're hearing. So even though we might not think of this as exactly a reference technology, it does bring your experience closer to reference when you're listening at a lower level.
So let's talk about dynamic EQ, because that kind of does some additional things, right? So what's the difference between dynamic volume and dynamic EQ?
Dynamic EQ is similar in terms of bringing you closer to a reference experience when you're not listening at reference level. So when you turn the volume down, one of the things that happens is the bass drops away, the treble drops away more than sort of the mid-range. And that's our ears. That's how our ears work. It's not anything in the system. It's not anything else. It's just the way we perceive sound in a space. And dynamic EQ can compensate for that. So as you turn it down, instead of missing out on the impact and the full breadth of the sound, dynamic EQ will compensate. So you turn it down, you still have a reference tonal balance. So you still have the same balance of sound that you would have at reference level. You just don't have to endure the neighbors yelling at you, or waking up the kids, or all the other things that come with having it at full tilt, full reference level.
Very intelligent dynamic loudness control.
Yes.
is what this is. Now, the other interesting thing about it is, as you turn it up and as you approach the reference level or reference volume level, it backs off.
It goes to 0.
If you're playing it at 0, it's not on. If that's your reference level. Now, you also have the ability to adjust that. So say, where do you want that to drop to start dropping off? So say your reference level in your room is -10, you can tell it that when I get to -10, don't apply yourself anymore.
Right.
And only when my kids are watching cartoons at -40 or -25, apply. So it's some people don't like it, some people love it. I think it makes it sound fuller because my wife doesn't like me cranking on it at reference level, and I still get the impact I want from the recording without having to play it. And then when I run it up to 0 when they're in bed, or when she's not in a room, it just switches off. So I think that is really, really good. The last one is for your neighbors, and that is called low frequency containment. So what does that do?
Yeah, it attenuates the bass. It takes it away so that it doesn't translate to your neighbors, but it does it with a clever twist, which is it remaps those frequencies into higher frequencies, giving you sort of what we'd call a phantom fundamental. So it gives you the sense of having those low frequencies present, even though they're not. So your neighbors won't know they're there, but you still feel kind of like they are. This is definitely a compromise, but again, the goal is to bring you as close to a reference experience, even if there have to be compromises for a real world listening environment where shaking the walls is just not okay.
Yep. And the old expression, some bass is better than no bass. Would you rather have you ever watch a movie at night? I mean, most of you guys have dedicated rooms, but many of us, I have a dedicated room, but there are lots of my friends that have their theater is right below their kid's bedroom, or you live in an apartment or condominium and your room is has a shared common wall with your neighbor, and the guy is banging on the wall with his broomstick or on the ceiling with his broomstick because you are driving him absolutely loco. This allows you to kick back and watch your Peaky Blinders or Game of Thrones at 1 o'clock in the morning without your neighbors calling the police on you. So that is one of the things that's available as well. So lots of tools. So if we go back, you can utilize the receiver to do the processing. If you want more control, step up to the app, $20, available for your phone, whether it's Android or Apple. And if you want the ultimate in control and you want all the aspects, you want to be able to tweak it a million different ways, like a lot of us who are enthusiasts, that is where you go into the Multi-Q X. And we got to make sure that Jeff can pay his engineers, and that retails for, we said $200, correct?
Yep, $199.99.
Okay.
Yep.
You can also use a touchpad rather than just your phone.
Yes.
As far as that, and right now it's a PC. The Multi-Q X is PC. Will it ever come out for Mac?
And we don't have a concrete plan around it. We've definitely explored the option and are looking at it, and hope to be able to do that. But we don't have a concrete.
That's what's holding me back.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
The Mac guy.
Yep. Yep. It does run well on some very inexpensive Windows laptops. So there are some options out there for the people who are able to do a cross-platform. It also runs, I'm told, it's not a totally supported environment, but if you can run Windows in parallels,
Yeah.
there are ways to run Windows on a Mac so that you
Yep,
can
that's what I
run
do.
this. Yep.
I have an ancient Acer laptop I keep around for some specific PC software that I run.
Mhm.
Ta-da.
Yeah,
and
and if pretty much any computer that runs Windows 10 or Windows 11 will run multi-QX. It's not, if it's a really old computer, it might not be the best experience, but it's certainly usable. It's certainly capable. And we actually are hoping to introduce some performance improvements around that pretty soon too.
Yeah, years ago when I bought a VW600ES projector, it came with a Sony Xperia tablet. And the projector's long gone, but I still have the Xperia tablet. I keep it around specifically for running my Odyssey app.
Perfect.
Yeah. And the interesting thing, like I said, the app is whenever there is a receiver on the network, the app you can use the app with that receiver. Remember, multi-QX is assigned to the receiver. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things, you license it to the receiver, not to the computer, to the receiver.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. So
Okay, we got a few questions here.
excellent.
So Bob asked which Denon and Marantz models will work with the app and with the laptop, with the laptop's $200 software.
It's a good question. The full list is on the Microsoft Store. So if you go into the Windows or Microsoft Store and search for multi-Q-X, multi-QX or Odyssey, you should be able to find it with either of those. Most AVRs in the last 5 years are supported. The multi-QX software, we will say, is recommended for maybe the XT and XT32 AVRs. It does support some of the other AVRs, but you'll get the most out of it if you have that XT32 AVR.
Exactly. So there's 3 levels of Odyssey built into our receivers, and that has to do with the processor. Remember, we said you buy a bigger receiver, you get a bigger power supply, you get bigger amplification, you get better video switching, but you also get a bigger brain that can run a more complex version. So there's 3 different levels, and he's saying basically the entry level unit, you could use it, but the request you're making, it doesn't have the tools, the full tool set to achieve your goals. So stepping up into something, anything over the I would say if a person's looking at a 2800 or above, when it that's where you're starting to get the full firepower of the Odyssey. Especially, so you can, I'm not sure exactly what models it is, but I would probably say 2800, 3800, you start to get into XT32. And what's it between XT and XT32?
So XT32 is named because it has about 32 times more sort of processing points, more points in the frequency spectrum that it can control. In both cases, those points are sort of distributed to where they are best used, but XT is going to give you a little less correction in the low frequencies where XT32 really shines. So one of the strategies with an XT AVR is to be a little more aggressive with your bass management, because in those cases, the subwoofer still has extremely good resolution, even in the low frequencies. So if you move your bass management up a little bit, let the subwoofer do a little more, you can correct that really nicely, even if you can't get the very low frequencies of your main speakers perfect. Whereas XT32 has the same on all channels, and we'll we kind of think of it as it's XT32 is somewhere around note by note accuracy, so half steps actually, 12th octave accuracy, starting at around 40 hertz, and a little below that it's a little less, but still very, very good. Still whole step, whole note, whole step accurate across the entire spectrum, which means every note can get its own EQ.
Another question, You said the dual speaker presets works with newer models. Paul asked, define newer models.
Dual speaker preset was introduced right at the beginning of COVID. So if you're looking at something like a 17, anything 600 series, 1600, 1700, 3600, 4600, those types of things. The 500 series, which is like the X8500, it does not support it. And the AV8805 does not support it. The 7706 does. So if it has a 600, so anything above 1600, 1700, anything above that has a 7, and that indication is going to do it. So basically, dual speaker preset was introduced in 2019, 2020 is when that first came out. The other way, like I said, would be to utilize the you would have to boot from the app, and that's what I do in my house. Is I have an AV8805, and that's what I do is I just open the app and I reload a different file from my app instead of having it stored, because it can't store it both in the AVR.
And it does that pretty quick.
It does it pretty quick. So you're talking about, 45 seconds to a minute and a half. So by the time you set it, by the time you go get your frosty beverage and you come back in the room, it's good to go.
Let's see, another question Paul has is, will the, I guess he's referring to the $200 Odyssey, will it support curves on dual subs on XT32?
So the subwoofer is treated, the subwoofer outputs, they're dual discrete outputs from the perspective of trims and delays, but they share a single filter. So what that means is the Odyssey sub process will time and level align those two subwoofers so that they're playing together, and then it will EQ them as one. And the reason we do this is because the low frequency content, the LFE, and even most of the bass from left and right is generally mono. Yeah. So it generally mixes down to, well, LFE is always mono. And so EQing those separately means that, well, they could both separately be perfect, but they won't necessarily work together in the room. So we EQ them as a single unit so that we know that in the room you're getting the response you desire.
If you did them
Makes
separately,
sense.
they could actually cancel each other out in certain.
Totally.
Exactly.
And this is something that the software can help you detect if for some reason they aren't playing, and somehow or another, even though they're time and level aligned, there could be also some sort of weird phase issues. And so you can measure them individually, just turn one off, turn the other one off, and you can measure each of them in the app and take a look at those responses and then measure them together and see. So it can be a kind of a powerful kind of debugging tool if you're running into a situation that just doesn't seem quite right. That's what we recommend.
Well, actually, I think Jeff, you and I did that in our replicator. We ran one sub, it looked great. We ran the other sub, it looked great when we saw them together. And that's what we did. We ran a test. We ran it. We did one. We looked at it. Then we ran the other one and we looked at it. Then we ran them combined and we saw that there was
still a mystery.
Time to move the
sub. That allowed me to go in and change the phase. And we realized we had to change one of the subwoofers like 60 degrees out of the phase by 60 degrees on one of the subwoofers, and everything fell into place. And it was a real quick way of troubleshooting or evaluating, bass. And that's another benefit of the software, is all these other things you can do. The other thing I like about it is, if say you want to go in and you change your center channel, and the old Odyssey, you would have to go in and run the whole thing over again, right? If you have 13 speakers, like we have a lot of times, we'll have 13 speakers in our theater. You're doing 13 speakers, 8 positions. It takes forever. But what happens is, all of a sudden an engineer brings in, here is the old definitive center channel. Here is the Mark II. And the only thing I'm changing is the center channel. What I can do is I can go into that app, into the software program, and just remeasure the center channel instead of having to do every single speaker again. Or say I want to change a position. I can just retest a position over again instead of having to do the whole system over again. And for people who like to tweak on things, that is a great advantage.
Wow, you may have sold me right there.
Because we've done it all the time. It's like, oh, let's put the different center channel in. Okay, okay, here we go again. We're gonna have to go through and run 13 speakers,
Yeah,
8
no.
positions. You know, it's a
Turn
serious
everything off in
commitment.
the house and kick the family out, right?
Whoop whoop whoop.
Yep.
So that's another nice thing. So it's just I think Jeff did a really good job and his team did a good job listening to the requests that people had about, I wish I would get it, or I would use it if it only did this, or if I could only change this, or if I only see this. So basically they thought about it. They tried to give you everything they possibly could that have been requests from enthusiasts like you guys.
Yeah, and a couple of other important aspects. You know, it's that one license for your AVR. It's a one-time deal, so you get all updates for free after that. So if there's a new feature that comes out, and this is one of the reasons we built it, is we saw an opportunity to be able to deliver technology directly to people. So if we come up with an advancement, you can have it sooner. It gives us a direct-to-consumer way to deal with it, and makes it easier. So one-time license fee for that AVR. Another thing we have going is a link in the app direct to our technical support. So you can submit questions online and get them answered fairly quickly usually. And we make it very easy to get the help and instruction you need if you're not able to get that information from the manual, which is also online and available.
Okay. Actually, there's a good question here from Paul asking about lossless streaming, FLAC versus Tidal, and how does Odyssey play against those formats. Let's talk first about FLAC, Tidal, and streaming service and things like that. We get asked a lot about MQA. Are we going to support it? You know, when are we going to support it? The MQA is normally done through streaming services. The HEOS system has the firepower to be developed and be programmed to do MQA. However, if I allot a bunch of engineers to work on MQA, they can't work on the new models, or they can't do upgrades for HDMI, and they can't work on the latest surround sound formats. You only have a certain amount of engineering firepower that can be allotted. And what we looked at was we always continuously look at the demand. And if it becomes a major request, it's something we'll look at. But if you look at a lot of streaming services, they're going to basically 192.24 FLAC files. So before, it was about compressing or coming up with a good way to wrap and make the file a little smaller because of the unreliability of streaming. I've heard people say, well, MQA does more than that. But the main thing is, one of the benefits is it's a smaller file. Now with internet, your house can stream 4K at 60 frames per second. Moving a 192.24 bit for bit FLAC file from back and forth is a no-brainer. So these days, most of the services are going towards uncompressed, high resolution, high bit depth, high sampling rate files in FLAC. So that seems to be the direction it's taking. If it makes this huge curve back towards MQA, I'm sure they will look at it. But right now, we do all of our demos in our $100,000 hi-fi room using streaming services like Amazon Music HD at 192.24. It's ones and zeros coming off of that board into the D-Day converters of the receiver, and it's the equivalent of if you had a disk there, or if it was running off of your hard drive. Now, how does it impact with Odyssey? Because you can utilize Odyssey for that. So I don't think it's just like the receiver treats it just like like a movie theater, like movie sound, right?
Yeah, it is more like movie sound in that respect. I'd have to look at specs. Yeah.
If I'm running it in stereo, is Odyssey still apply?
Yeah, it should. Yeah.
But it's just for 2 channels.
Yeah.
Okay. So the DDA converters would take it, break it down, goes in into Odyssey, and then
Well, DDA comes after us,
Mhm.
after
yeah, it
Odyssey
does.
filtering. So after decoding, we get basically a PCM bit stream,
Mhm.
and that's where we apply our processing.
Okay, that was a very good question. Never put that in there. So, yeah, I'm not going to comment, Paul, about our opinion about it. But like I said, the goal is we try our best to try to provide you with the latest surround sound formats. We're always the first when it comes to surround sound formats, things like HDMI. So we do try to lead the industry, and I think we do a pretty good job at that when you look at Denon and Marantz products.
They just work. I mean, you see a lot of this high-end stuff. And a lot of times there's HDMI issues.
Yeah, so that's a good point, because the one thing before I let you guys go, think of Sound United like the Volkswagen Group. I like using car analogies. Volkswagen owns Volkswagen, Audi, Porsche, Lamborghini. They used to own, I think they own Bentley. I think it's either Bentley or Rolls-Royce. I always lose track. I think it's Rolls-Royce. And they used to own Bugatti and Ducati. All of those things deal with transportation, getting you from point A to point B, but they tailor to different customers. No one's going to look at a Lambo and say it's a Volkswagen. Just because they're owned by the same company, the brands are siloed. But there is some advantages for having Volkswagen own Lamborghini. Like as Mike mentioned, a lot of times high performance lacks reliability because those companies are very good. Lamborghini's very good at building beautiful motors, beautiful bodies, and beautiful interiors. But those little things like automatic door locks, navigation, and your electrical system, they're not too good at. And you end up with the famous unreliable Italian supercar, right? If you look at high-end audio companies, same thing. They're good at building amplifier circuits, and power supplies. But things such as HDMI, RS-232, IP control, smart remote management, that's not really what they're very good at. When it comes to Sound United, each brand is siloed. They have their own sound masters, their own tuning. They're allowed to build the amplifiers and speakers that they want. But all of those little things that would trip up a company like Class A, like HDMI switching and RS-232 protocols, can be done by the bigger company, which has better engineering. Just like those electric door locks, the door locks in a Lamborghini is a Volkswagen. The navigation system in a Lamborghini is a Volkswagen. Those things do not make a Volkswagen, and a Lamborghini a Lamborghini.
Yeah.
The companies can focus on what they do best. And that's one of the benefits of Sound United is you end up with reliable performance, whether it's Class A, Marantz, or Denon, because the stuff that would trip up a manufacturer is done by a bigger group so they can share resources. Make sense?
Mhm.
And I
Yep.
think that's it. This is a fun session. I love these things. I love hanging out with you kind of guys. So,
It's
so
very
anything
cool.
else first? Paul agrees.
Alright.
Yeah.
So
So
close it, Jeff.
Yep. So yeah, thank both Jeff and Phil for taking the time to do this with us. And as always, that Mike has been recording this, and we'll put it up for those that couldn't attend tonight. If you want to see it, send us an email. We'll send you the link for the recorded version.
But do I have
Excuse
another question? Because somebody had their hand up. Well, maybe they answered it already.
okay.
Thank you. Never mind.
Okay. Well, one of the things I want to point out is if you haven't subscribed, we have Sound United has a YouTube training channel where I bring in guys like Jeff and Glenn Stone from THX and DTS and from not THX, from DTS and IMAX Enhanced. He'll probably get mad if I call it TTX. But so we actually have that. So if you have not subscribed to that YouTube channel, please check that out, because we get huge questions. I think, Jeff, we've done two separate 90-minute sessions just on
Odyssey,
on
on Odyssey and multi-cue. Yep.
So if you really want to dive into it, or you really want to get into the workings, the inner workings of a Marantz receiver, or Bowers and Wilkins, or you want to learn about, we've had guys talk about room compensation and also and acoustic treatments. So please make sure that you like and subscribe to the Sound United YouTube channel. We're gonna actually, after CEDIA, I guarantee there's going to be a demand for a lot of new sessions, and I'm sure we'll make sure that we put those up. And if you ever want me to come back on, I love hanging out and talking to you guys, and we can talk about everything from HDMI to surround sound formats, all that stuff. I get a kick out of hanging out with you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
All right.
I guess we'll
Thanks for
leave it
having me.
there.
It's been very good.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Phil.
You're welcome.
Okay. So take
Good
care,
evening.
guys.
All right. take
Adios.
care.
Bye.